Hey Jason, how's it going?
Hey, doing fantastic. I'm excited to be here and speak with you and all the fantastic people that are in attendance from around the world.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you. Yeah, thanks everyone else on the line for joining us. Hope you had a good lunch break or got some work accomplished, check some emails, things like that. We'll hop right into it. Jason is here. He was one of our top rated speakers from our last in-person conference in Madison back in 2019. So we're excited to have him back here today virtually. And yeah, this will be our last presentation of the day. At the end of the presentation, I'll post a quick survey in the chat. We'd love for you to take that, give us any feedback you have. Hopefully in the next day or two, we'll have all the presentations spliced and edited and uploaded into our digital community so you can watch them back. And if you missed anything, you can have access to those at any time that you need in the digital community, but we'll jump right into it. So Jason is joining us. He's the Chief People Officer and Leadership and a teamwork expert. He helps executives, managers, and HR departments develop unstoppable leaders, talent, and employee experiences. He provides coaching, trainings, keynote speaking, conflict resolution, and other services. He spent over 15 years in leadership positions working with industry changers, some pretty big names such as Steve Jobs, Reed Hastings from Netflix, Mark Hurd from HP, Mark Cuban, and many others. He's the best-selling author of Social Wealth that sold more than 60,000 copies. His 2017 TED Talk was on how to get coworkers to like each other. He's been named one of the top 10 executive coaches the past couple of years, top HR influencer, a top leadership and coaching provider by the Texas Lawyer magazine. More than 25,000 leaders, managers, and employees are using his culture and team building game, which he brought to CultureCon, Cards Against Mundanity, to skyrocket trust, communication, and teamwork. It's been used at a ton of companies, some big name companies like Amazon, Southwest Airlines, E&Y, Google, Gillette, Microsoft, Oracle, a bunch of other companies as well. He has a law degree and master's in communication from Syracuse University. And Jason, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, well, it always sounds funny someone reading your bio. It's like kind of like a eulogy or something like that, and like you're not even present. So, but it's fantastic to be here and to speak with all of you. And wherever you're at, I want to thank you for taking time out, because this is, an unprecedented time right now in all of our careers, where there's a significant sea change going on in looking at the employee experience itself and how it's been elevated, right? And I think obviously a driver of that has been COVID, but it's always really been there. And I think being remote and all the other challenges has really increased the focus on this area, and we'll be going through that today. But I think that for everyone in attendance, right, and everyone watching on video, I think this is an incredible opportunity, right? It's like CultureCon was invented, right? And I was telling Zach that, I mean, they couldn't have started the organization, the conference, at a better time. I mean, right, like they really anticipated this, and then it like hit like this. And so the years ahead are really going to be seeing like a time where we're going to look back and say, wow, that was sort of the wild, wild west, right? I was out in technology in Silicon Valley back right in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that felt like the wild, wild west to me, being in the technology world. And I think this is going to be one from a sea change for us, looking at really how the human experience, the employee experience has really been elevated. And we're going to go and talk through this. So no matter whether you're an individual contributor, a manager, a leader of the team, or owning a company, you're going to be able to get a lot out of this that you can use as far as a strategic model, how to think about this, the reasons behind it, and then you'll have access to get tools, tips, and other things that I've come up with, or just ask me for things that I've created, and I'll be sure to send it to you. So I wanted to show this because I always think it's kind of funny. I always think about Zoom, right? And I thought about that today as well, because I had some audio meetings, I had some video meetings, and also I've had in-person meetings today. So I've lived in a hybrid world of all these other things. And I just think about, it's funny, the days that I don't have video, how I dress and think versus the ones that I do. So I hope you find a little humor. It's the afternoon for lunch. I have to wake you up and make sure that you're present. So you may be thinking, why am I showing you an iceberg? Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is to think about really what are the leading indicators, right? What's really happening? And one of the things that I read years ago about old ship captains is whenever they saw an iceberg, right, they weren't really worried about what they could see, but what they couldn't see. And I spoke with a colleague of mine that I work with that is an executive now in customer experience. And what he told me is one of the hardest things about his job is to get people to not look at the end metrics about the customers, right? Revenue per customer or satisfaction or other things, but to start to look at things much earlier in the process, which are actually the leading indicators that really dictate what follows after that. Because if you can get to the root cause early on, you can really influence the outcomes. And so a lot of the things that we look at today as traditional outcomes are actually really lagging indicators. And when you look at that, you'll always be behind. And I think that it's always hard to find the leading indicators because you're not really sure where to start. It requires a lot of experimentation. It requires failure, right? And it requires pivoting. And I think those lessons are incredibly important, and to get people to buy in when you're thinking about how you need to operate moving further and forward as a business today. I wanted to show you this because I think this is pretty incredible. The Jeff Bezos, right, is now shifting up to the chairman position. And one of his key focuses, or one of the top two ones, is becoming the best employer, right? And they're focusing a lot of their energy. And how do you do this? How do you go about it, right? And they, like every other company, have a lot of work. And what was interesting was the other day I was reading about Amazon, and one of the challenging is how they're dealing with their workforce. And this is a New York Times article, if you want to look into it. I think it was an op-ed. And they've had to replace every single hourly worker in the United States in the last year. And if you look at the data, it costs anywhere between 80% and 300% per worker to replace them in total cost. So if we look at the bottom number, right, and if we take the super conservative number, I've seen some people do 50%. And if you take that in consideration, for all of their workers, they're having to replace 1.5 times them, right? So if their salary is $50,000, the real cost is at minimum 75. And it's probably more than that per person. So you can see why he is doing this, right? And also, we're not even looking at the other ramifications of all this stuff as well, right? That happens when you have turnover like that in an organization itself. And I want to take a second for the future of work, because again, like I said before, I mean, when you really look at it, and I've had like 1,000 or more conversations, right, in the last 6 months as I've been really researching and doing this more, because all of my clients and companies and even people that are entrepreneurs really are faced with a sea change. And to stay competitive, they need to do new things. And also, it's a massive opportunity to take market share and to leap ahead of other people. And I think now, I have clients of mine that are competing against people that are 10 to 100 times bigger in terms of revenue and beating them successfully. And so I think this transformation really is helping people do this in a way that really wouldn't have been possible before at the level that it is now. And at the heart of this transformation is the old business-centric model, right? It's kind of like, think about the old gray beard, right? It's results, it's all the metrics. And a lot of people still look at that. But the reality is, and if you look at Amazon and the rest of the companies, what you're seeing is a new employee-centric model really puts the employee either next to the customer or business development or sales, which has never happened before, right? Or it even trumps it. So I think it's really important to take a look that this is what's happening all over. And you need to help your organization, no matter what role you're in, understand that that's happening, right? And if you can't get buy-in, you can still do this on your own. You don't need necessarily other people. It is more helpful, but it is not required. And also, you can be a pioneer, right? By showing them that this is working, you will find yourself getting promoted. You will find yourself making more money and significant more opportunities in the future for yourself. And so what does employee-centric mean, right? And I think it's important to talk about this because it's obviously at the core of, customer and employee experience. So we want to talk about the goals, the skills, the problems, and mindsets of everyone to really understand what's on the top of mind. Are we clear? Do we have a target that we're going in? Are we all rowing in the right direction? Or is the company authentic? Are the communications transparent? Are we actually using vulnerability? Are we collaborating in a way that's being useful? And do we understand how to use teamwork? Well, the other part of this that's happening is now not only you're seeing listening is mission critical, it needs to be a company value because the employee expectations are rising. And the only way to meet them is to understand them and understand them in a way that's never been done before. And if we look at this, the employee life cycle matters as much as the customer life cycle. And when you think about the employee life cycle, you can think about the employee journey, right? And that is the same thing as the customer journey. You have to map out the parts and the moments that matter and understand how you can impact those. Because that is the way that you'll be able to hire, you will be able to retain and develop and then evaluate your top talent. And that's absolutely critical, right, to creating a competitive company that owns its market. And the quote I put down is traditional metrics are very incomplete and they're lagging indicators of what's going on in your business health. And I think that's really the way to start looking at this is you have to have a much broader view of what's going on. And so I wanted to also give you, here's the model when I'm looking at it. And here are the buckets that I'm focusing on with my clients is the leadership part of it. How do you manage other people? How do you lead, right? And also the other part of this is how do you create meaningful work? How do you create the culture, right? And the strategic teamwork that is going to create the environment for people to succeed. And the next bucket is really looking at what's the workforce of the future, right? What are the learning and development that's happening? What DEI strategies are you using? How are you using recognition and the employee experience to move yourself forward? And obviously health matters a lot for people. And that's a significant thing. But is the underpinning of all of this, it is absolutely critical that you build trust and extreme trust, which we'll talk about later, which is absolutely paramount to doing the rest of this. You have to have people that are resilient, that are able to bounce back. And you must have people who are getting feedback, who are listening, right? And underpinning all that really means there's deep knowing of people and the organization and the external world. There's a place of safety so people can raise issues, talk about them, and bring things forward. The feeling of connection, right? That you know the people and that you matter. And there's a sense of caring that people have your back. And that is a core tenet of trust. So like I said before, this is a massive career opportunity. I don't care what discipline you're in, understanding this will help you. And I know you're going to crush it, and I won't let you not do it because that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the key drivers, about how to do this, and strategies, activities, and tools. So let's talk about the key drivers. So if you look at this, you're going to see black swan disruptions. And you're probably thinking, what is that, right? Well, black swans are major events that are happening in the workplace, in our environment, in verticals, right? And overall in the economy that are changing things. And we're seeing more and more of these. So what you're having to do is build resiliency, be able to be agile, change, pivot, and figure things out very quickly. So you need people in the organization that are able to adjust to this and deal with this new environment because it's happening more and more frequent and it's continued to happen that way and moving forward. When you look at human resources leaders, right? Like, what do they think is going to change? And I think this is, useful to take a look at, because I've spoken to a lot of chief human resources officers over like the last 6 months to try to understand, and these line up with a lot of what they're dealing with. Obviously, there's some variance and variations depending on the industry and the individual, but developing people, like, what do you do about the work environment, right? Because if you look at flexibility, over 60% of workers saying, if I don't have some remote option, I'll seriously consider finding a new job. So I've got clients like in the legal industry, and I've spoken to them, and successfully they've been able to convince their employer and the law firm itself to adjust the schedule. Now they're working in marketing and business development, and the conversations have been now that the competitiveness of those jobs and what they do isn't just other law firms, right? It's actually every company. And diversity is another challenge that's happening, right? And that's nothing new, and it's really difficult. And that's a whole other conversation, because the challenge right now is that it's a structural issue that needs to be changed. It's not something that you can put training and it'll really move the needle if it's not part of a larger initiative. And if that initiative is not tied to executive pay, you're most likely not going to move the needle very far. And then the leadership aspirations employees, right? Are you creating the leaders of tomorrow? Are they what I call future ready or not? And that is a pretty high bar. And talent problems are a huge issue, right? Attracting and retaining, and we're going to talk about that, this is now the musical chairs of jobs, and people are going to be switching, and they're going to be expecting new opportunities to develop and grow. And it's much more difficult to train and help and guide managers along the way, because they have a lot more challenges than ever before, and there are a lot of competing interests, and there's a lot of difficulties, and they need more help than ever before. So learning and development is a key critical spot, and it is a point where you have to invest. And if you're an organization that's not investing in that, I highly advise you to invest in yourself. And obviously you're here today, so you get that concept, but a lot of people don't. And what ends up happening is that when you think about leadership, management, and other things, those are softer power skills, which we'll talk about, and those are learned behaviors. And those are the things that will separate you out. When I have conversations, because I do 360s all the time for my clients, and I've done probably 500 conversations in the last 6 months, almost all the time, the conversations about room for improvement always stems down to soft or power skills. It's very rarely the strategy. And if it is, it's more about how they're viewing it, which is a soft skill, not about their execution itself. So the leadership quality is also a huge issue, right? And you can see how HR thinks about it in leaders. And an interesting thing here is there's a lot of research studies that go, and I read one a couple of years ago that looked at 5,000 senior leaders, and then they interviewed all their direct reports, and they rated themselves on 20 different leadership and management questions, such as, how well do you communicate? How well do you promote teamwork, right? Other things like that. And when they looked at the data, out of the 19 out of 20 categories, the leaders significantly overrated themselves as their direct reports, which goes to show you is that there's a huge bias we have, and we need outside feedback, and we need to seek it out, because people, as a natural tendency, overestimate their own abilities and underestimate it for other people. It actually is the same thing for trust. And there's a phenomenon, which again, we could talk about, but in psychology terms is real and is out there. And I think the challenge right now is there's a huge discrepancy, but leaders believe and where employees are at, right? And really anything under a leader itself. And if this doesn't change and the gap doesn't close, it says that you're not listening, you're not paying attention, you're not caring. And the only way to do that is by asking questions, and to ask better questions on a more regular basis. And remote work is challenging, right? And this is according to employees. So yes, I know people are talking about remote work, but a lot of employees know that it's very difficult to collaborate, right, in a remote environment. You can do it, and of course it's possible, and a lot of times that you have to do that, but there is a point to going in the office. And when you're thinking about that, a huge piece of that is the collaboration. Now, I will say another big point of this is, and I'm seeing this in financial services, and I saw companies like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have called this out, is that they've lost the market share because they've had other competitors that are meeting with clients in person. And that's what they say. Whether that's true or not, again, meeting people in the flesh is not the same in video, and you cannot replicate it, right? I like to tell people, how many people have gotten married to a spouse or a partner, right, that they've never met before and don't meet? Probably close to zero. How many best friends did someone have that never met them? Well, probably close to zero, because meeting someone in person is what solidifies a relationship. So remote work is there, but really the hybrid is where people need to move to, or find ways that they're able to meet people in person strategically. And there's a lot of concerns here about going back to the office and things that need to happen, right? And I think the challenge is people are not ready for this. And I have clients, and really no one is ready. And I think the data that is 33% is actually pretty optimistic. I think it's much lower. And the other part of this is I have never seen the amount of people that are changing jobs. And the data is somewhere between, and you can look at the variations in studies, somewhere between 25 to 50% of people will be actively looking for another job by the end of the year. And those are people that have jobs. And you're going to see more job switching than ever before. So there's a lot of things that are required and things to do. And if you don't have these conversations with people and monitor, people will leave, or even if they don't, it is the start of their exit, right? A lot of times what happens when people quit or change jobs, it's not an immediate moment, but it's a slow chipping away. And this is a major concern. My clients are coming to me that are below C-level, and even C-level people are asking the question, should I stay in my job or not, right? Should I switch? And I've never had that before, where every single one of them's asking me that question and really looking at that in a new way. And so if I were you and you have direct reports, I would be concerned about that. If you're in that position, well, you're going to be looking for something because there are more opportunities. And frankly, you should, right? I mean, you should be working in an environment that brings out the best in you and that you can be successful in. And if that's not happening, you have to have those conversations to create it, or you need to find a place where you can do that. So employee engagement trends, right? The data is showing it's gone down in 21 a little bit, but it really hasn't. It's gone escalated up, down, every which way, and the numbers are still pretty low. But really what stands out is manager engagement is declining, right? And it's declining even more this year. And the managers are the key variance of it, right? So what ends up happening is when you look at an organization, and I have this conversation with clients of mine that are at vice president or C-level, is your manager training and how they're interacting with their direct reports is going to be their ability to stay competitive, keep top talent, to be able to scale, grow, and do everything that you want to do. And part of the problem now is manager burnout is really going sky high. And I think it's a major problem, and helping people identify those are in burnout are critical, right? And you need to be asking people things like, have you taken a vacation, and monitor people taking time off, right? Be doing things to help manage people's health and look at all these things for everyone that your manager, and this is even for colleagues too, because if you have colleagues you care about, you don't want them to leave. And as a peer, you might be the only person that is reaching out to them or helping them. And, why not help? So another problem is really a lot of the leadership and management programs are just not good. And all the time I'm coming across these that are ineffective or really don't help people or not prescriptive. And yes, digital learning is critical, but there's a role for it all, and you've got to figure out, and you also have to figure out who to invest in, right? You can't invest in everyone. So you have to find the places that you can really impact people, and where the investment is like one-on-one versus group, and how do you hire outside trainers and all the rest of the things that you're thinking about is absolutely critical, because you have to build up the future capabilities, right? Do you know what people are going to need to do and need to have to stay competitive? What are your customers and partners and other people going to need in 1, 3, 5 years? And do you know? And if you don't, that's fine, but you've got to figure it out so you can have the capabilities and skills of the people. Now, there are soft skills and power skills that are baseline ones that everyone should have, but there are other ones that people need to do, and there are hard skills mixed in here as well. So how do you design it, right? Well, we're going to go through your playbook, right? And these are the things I would focus on, because these are the things that are driving the needle. I've seen work successfully. I work on clients that make exponential impact for the amount of money that you spend in here. So we're going to go through all of these and talk about them quickly so you can get a better understanding of what's going on and how to leverage these. So the human-centric leadership, right? You've got to learn from your team and other leaders. And that's not only getting feedback, they have indexes, right? There are companies like Sanofi, there are companies like Sabre that do leadership indexes. There are people that rate leaders, and then people also get to pick leaders they get to work for, do projects with. So there's a lot going on, and you could argue about the rating system, but it is the feedback that matters, and you need to find new ways to get people feedback on a consistent basis that is a leader, and require it of them, and not just wait for a performance, right? So one of the things I do that makes a major difference is people do 360s for performance, and I found out years ago they don't work that great. If you do them in non-performance cycles, people actually read them, right? I've had clients, and I had a recent client who got a 360 5 years ago and never read it, never even opened it. And I made them open it and read it, and it's actually mainly good. And they're like, well, I didn't want to open it to read the bad news. So we did one on a non-performance cycle where they got to pick people, and every piece of feedback they took, they internalized it, and it helped them make significant changes in directions that made them better leaders, better managers, better peers, and better employees. So there are a lot of ways to do this, but that is part of it. Now, you also have to learn leadership management and best practices. People are not born with these things. There's no little baby that raises their rattle and says, boy, I'm a great leader. I know how to talk to people. I know how to do one-on-one check-in. I mean, you should be laughing because it's supposed to be funny, but it's true. Right? Listening is absolutely critical, and we need to be a better listener, but part of that is asking much better questions. But questions are the key, right? I went to law school, and I can save you the expense. The key thing is he or she that asks the best questions gets the best feedback, right? Self-awareness is obviously absolutely critical, and people's self-awareness is absolutely horrible, right? The data shows, and Tasha Durek, who I've spoken to many times, has a great book called Insight. And inside the book, it says, 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% are. And the data is 4 to 8% from men, and women, it's like 10 to 14. And I find that to be very true, right? So I always say that getting women in more leadership roles is actually significantly advantageous for organizations itself. There's social learning that happens, right, by getting leaders to teach subjects they don't know about, by getting feedback, by talking to their peers, and there's a lot more there, right? And I'm not going to go through all the rest of these, but also the bottom, diversity of thinking in DEI is absolutely critical, because what often happens is people tend to pick people like them, and that is for survival mechanisms and fear, right? And the fear is it's all going to fall apart, and you gravitate towards people who are more like you. And that's not bad itself, because that is where our brain goes, but you have to challenge that. And when you look at all the data, diversity of thinking creates significant competitive advantages, higher profit, higher revenue, higher sales, higher everything, right? And so the other part of this is psychological safety. And that is the ability, right, to take risks, to speak up, to share your opinions, right, to innovate and try things that may fail. I mean, all of these things are absolutely critical. And if you don't institute them, then you won't do near as well. And if you look at the data, like Google did this Project Aristotle back in 2012 to 2014, and they found globally the #1 reason for high performing teams, the #1 reason was psychological safety. Amy Edmondson at Harvard has written some landmark research. I've read a lot of it. I use it. I see it. When I look at top sales teams, the reason that the #1 sales team sticks out from other people in most instances is psychological safety. It's not something people usually identify as that, but it is what's really going on. So you have to think about how creating talent and not acquiring talent. And the companies that are doing this are really making leaps and bounds, right? So you'll see Bank of America, one of the things that they're doing is they're not just taking financial services people, they're actually training them based on characteristics that stand out and make them successful. They're teaching them the finance, right? There's other like places that are doing the same. I talked to a couple pharmaceutical companies that are, for the first time ever, they are not just taking science people, they are taking people with liberal arts degrees and developing them and teaching them the science on hand, right? So I think you need to go beyond what you normally think of and get a lot more innovative to train people, because that is what's happening. Because hard to find candidates, and candidates are not going to be easier to find in the future, right? Maybe that's something that's 5 years away, but it's not anytime soon. And it's not just an inflationary market that's causing this. There's a lot more things. So internal mobility matters, right? And you'll see Schneider Electric in Europe has done some pretty cool things by allowing people to try new jobs, to have opportunities across the company. And you've got to think about creating career pathways and navigate employees to try things. Now, I know every company isn't that big, so you have to have conversations and figure out, are people in the right places and what they might like to try, and if possible, allow them those opportunities. And you have to have a focus on this from a company, right? And if you don't, you are going to be left behind. Every one of my clients is having a hiring problem, and everyone is having a retention problem. In fact, I got off the phone today, and 2 people that are high-level marketing people just got offered 100% increase in their salary. Another company just doubled it. Well, I'm not sure. We've tried some things to save them. I'm not sure. But part of this is they didn't really communicate and talk to them. And this could have been figured out much earlier on. And one of the things that happens is happy and engaged employees, it takes at least 20% more salary. And a lot of the times they aren't even looking and won't take the call, right? So it's really important to focus on these things. So you have to focus on new sources of talent. You create candidates, right? Like 2 of my clients are in marketing companies and have digital marketing agencies, and we're working on actually teaching people the marketing, right? And actually helping them figure this out through universities, but done differently. And that's going to help recruiting, retention, and also creating far superior employees who are much farther developed than other people. And so they're going to be reaping rewards at people that are able to operate 2 to 3 levels above where they currently are. So they'll actually be getting them at a discount and be able to recreate that if people do leave, right? So there's a diversified portfolio out there. I mean, you have to get DEI in it. And there's also ways, how are you operating with AI and going through the hiring process? And I think that the interview process, blind interviews, there's a lot of other things to do that create significantly higher talent, right? And part of all of this is also that if you want to have DEI, you have to have more candidates. And what they've shown is that if you don't have more first-line employees go up to middle managers, you won't really be making a change in DEI, because it is a structural issue that it's a numbers game. And you have to have more numbers of people for you to be able to promote them and get them into roles. And these are all different companies, right? And the financial services companies are always the farthest behind, right? And forcing people back in the office when they don't want to go means they'll lose people eventually, because people will leave. Again, I think the hybrid model makes the most sense. And I'll tell you why. I've now done 15 in-person trainings with people in the last 2 to 3 months. And what I found in all those instances, employees got together for the first time in a department or group, right, of varying sides for the first time since the pandemic. when you look at how engaged, how much energy and what occurred, all the executives, all the leaders, all the managers that were attending and watching this, like, we're super excited to see the enthusiasm and the energy that happened. And every person, when I was talking, like, it's so great to see people. I'm so excited. And all of these things are super important, right? When you're taking a look at this, and, you know, how you go about focusing on like what to do and how to go about doing it. So the other thing in there is, how do you make it work? Well, some of the things to look here is, you know, do I have the tools? Do I know the rules, right? One of the problems is I have clients pick out, okay, for the hybrid workforce, what are the rules? Like, what happens if you don't show up, right? So I've had one of them, we designed one that you're using PTO days. And ultimately, if you say you're going to be here and not there, then you're going to lose the ability to actually have like a flexible work schedule, right? And people are asking themselves, like, the culture, can I thrive and be recognized here? How is the feedback am I getting, right? How are one-on-ones done, right? Check-ins. Well, most people do them wrong. They don't have the structure. They're not asking for feedback, right? And one of the valuable things you can do as a manager, leader, and actually you can use this as a peer, is to start to ask people a set of questions every 6 months. Like, what are things I should be doing more of, less of, right? What things do you love that I'm currently doing? How do you think it is to work with the team? What suggestions would you have for improving our teamwork? Well, sitting down and asking people those questions and doing them every 6 months will allow you to understand happy employees, not happy employees, get great feedback, because otherwise what happens is you're getting lagging information and resentment and things that are built up. And I do a lot of conflict resolution, and what ends up happening is people get mad about an issue 3 or 5 years ago. They can't even remember they were super small, but now is in crisis mode. That if it was dealt with then, it wouldn't even be an issue. And the cost is staggering of what goes on. And it would have been much easier. And all you need to do is set up times and check-ins. And if you want a check-in process or whatever, just email me and I will send you one that you can do. And it's pretty simple, and the questions to use. So the next part of this will go on, and we'll start to talk about listening and feedback is absolutely critical, right? And people want to be heard. They want accurate and timely decisions on solving problems. And if you don't know about it, you're not going to do that. And so then you're going to be a laggard, and that upsets people, and because they don't feel like people are listening. I get that all the time. That's happening, right? Every person I work with has 2 major complaints that always round up in the top 3. And this is anyone from a C-level person all the way down, right? It's that I don't get enough feedback and people are not helping me in my career, right? So that feedback and listening is a complaint for every single person. So why wouldn't you want to do this, right? And again, you can use these things as a peer and working across groups and with other people. It's not just in this situation up or down, right? It's something that you can use across very easily and extremely effective, and stand out from other people and get way better results, get buy-in, influence, and feedback. And here's a bunch of tools. And what do you need to do, right? Well, there's surveys, there's weekly pulses, new hire feedback, you know, employee like scores, like net promoter scores. Well, there's employee promoter scores, there's scanning tools, there's other things you can use. The stay interview strategy is a great one. And you pick out 10 to 25% of the people that you want to stay, and you ask specific questions and you get specific feedback, and it is on non-performance cycle, and you do it every 6 months. Again, I do this for clients. I can send you an example of something if you want to do. Skip level meetings are absolutely critical because they keep everyone accountable, and they help you as a leader understand what's going on in the organization much earlier and to take action. The manager one-on-ones I've talked about on the targeted ones, and the data shows you, OC Tanner has some data, and there are quite a bit that the managers and leaders that have weekly one-on-ones, their employees are 50% more productive, effective, and engaged and make an impact. And that goes down to 20-some% if you do bi-weekly, and it ends up turning negative if you do it monthly or not at all. Ongoing performance reviews, everything's a performance review. I tell clients to do them probably 3 times a year. I think quarterly, if your organization says, then do them. but I don't necessarily think there's enough data, and you should always giving feedback. But if you're aggregating it, I think 3 times a year, if you're doing all the rest of the things I'm doing, is plenty to give people the feedback and the ability to adjust and understand things. So this is really telling you that employee recognition is absolutely key, right? And people do it absolutely horrible. And a lot of peer-to-peer recognition is something you can do, right? Because as a manager, it's super hard, and you can't do everything. So enroll other people to help you. So what are things you can do? So I try to find things that are simple for people to do that cost nothing, because then the resistance is much lower. And I'll tell you a couple things that work extremely well. So what I'll do is I'll have teams every month go around and spend, maybe 30 to 60 seconds a person, no more, pick one person out of the group, thank them, tell them what they did and the impact it made. That's it, right? Amazing what it'll do. The other thing that I'll have teams do, and this is incredible, and let's say I would do this if you're a peer or anywhere or working with other people, this works like magic. I guarantee if you do this, you will find, if you do this after this, when you stop and do this, I guarantee the next 24 hours, you are going to be in a whole different situation with people. I have them go and recognize one person, give them 3 to 5 minutes to either text or email, thank the person, tell them what they did and why it was important, and imagining getting that if you walk in the morning or some point in the day that someone actually cared and that you mattered and sent them. Well, that person now is your advocate. They care about you. They'll have their back and they'll walk through walls for you. They'll go through fire. And one of the things you could do right now is email a handful of people, right? I would do 5 as an experiment. And if you do thank them, what they did, and then tell them the impact, that is probably 3 to 4 sentences. That'll probably take you 30 seconds. This activity will take you under 5 minutes and it will help you immensely. So that's a couple things to do. Now, there's a lot more things you can do, and there are things that would really help, but I wanted to give you ones that are so easy that anyone can do them, and they're inexpensive, meaning 0, and they'll make a significant impact because I've done these thousands of times and they work no matter what environment, no matter what country, no matter what you're doing, they work. So the L&D program is pretty important, obviously critical to do. There are learning councils, right? You have to figure it out what people need to do, how to employ it, what gaps are going on. And one of the key things, Marcus Buckingham, who's fantastic, and I've spoken to him several times, and he posted a great article in Harvard Business Review in May 2019, I believe. And it talks a little bit about this, and he has a lot of research to focus on people's strengths, because that is what's going to make them the happiest, and also the organization. And so you have to understand what they are to leverage it. Continuous learning and development is absolutely critical. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir because all of you are here, but I think if you don't have it, you will not be successful. It is a required competency. There's also succession management, right? I like to tell people, if you're managing people, you got to have someone that's taking their job, and you got to train people below you to start, managing upwards and take away what you're doing, because then you can do higher level work and you have a better argument to get promoted because there's someone that can immediately step in and do it. And then you are actually doing higher level work and doing the job of someone else, even if that is not required or anyone asks you of it. That's something that you can do very effectively. So again, here are job skills, right? And these are ones that I've spoken to learning and development experts, a lot of top companies and what they're focusing on. And these things are one that I would focus on if I were creating these. And if you're looking at it, these are areas for you to focus in on that will make a major difference as you go forward. And the challenge with the soft skill, right, is that you have to learn it, you have to do it, and you have to get feedback. You have to incorporate the feedback and then do it again, right? Trust is absolutely critical. I talked about this last time I was at CultureCon, and the critical thing is, are you building extreme trust? And the bar is really high. And if you don't do that on your team, you will not be effective. And this goes for a manager or an employee or working across at another organization, or even individuals as you're doing this. And so how do you end up doing this? Well, you end up doing it by sharing experiences in group. One of the things in research that I did was a Professor Arthur Aaron back in 1997 was looking at interpersonal closeness. And he had complete strangers sit across the table, ask vulnerable questions over 45 minutes. There were 36 of them, and then looked at the results. And these have been done, in hundreds of situations. And 30% of the people rated their relationship with that person as the closest in their life, which is absolutely amazing, right? It's astonishing. And I've done now, probably, I said 25,000 there, but I've gone back and looked at it, and the data is probably more like 70, 80,000 people have gone through my game, Cards Against Mundanity. And I'd say to you that it's pretty remarkable at what goes on, because the sharing of you and your whole self is what gets buy-in, because caring is the most important part of trust. And when you do it in a group, you see yourself in other people, and other people see themselves in you. And that is what creates the magic. And here it shows you right here, right? And why does extreme trust matter? Well, if you look at this, if everyone in the team rates everyone at a 5, you will be operating as either the best team in the company or one of the top couple teams, because your engagement levels, which is also a proxy for productivity and output, is there. And if people rate everyone as a 4, which seems good, right? It's trust. You're operating, and your level of engagement is one to actively distrust, which is a 1. So the data is pretty stark, and it is very difficult to do this. And there's no team that will do this by itself unless there is work put in. And there are exceptions to this rule, but it rarely occurs. And strategic teamwork is obviously critical, right? 80% of the work is dependent on other people, yet no one spends time in this. And again, it's the analogy of a baby. No baby is born understanding how to do teamwork. And it is a skill and learnability. And there are processes and structures and things. And if you don't teach people to do it, they will not do it. I work with people all the time on misunderstandings, miscommunications, right? If you look at the average company, every employee's miscommunications and misunderstandings, no matter what the size, cost on average $10,000 a year. So if your company is 20 people, you can see that magnitude of that problem that you're flushing right down the drain. And that is an average. That is not the total amount that you're seeing. So when we go through all of this stuff and we're looking at this model, it's complex, right? This isn't easy, but it is something that you can do as an organization if you're focused and working on the right things. And you can make a massive difference in your bottom line metrics for the investment in time that you make. And if you don't, you'll be dealing with a lot of fires. If you know and see people that are always dealing with constant fires and putting them out, and they feel like they're not strategic and they're frustrated and they're burning out, it's because they're focusing on the lagging indicators and not the leading one. And they're not focusing on these things. And that is the reason why it's occurring. And here, again, are the things to focus on. It's about the leadership. What can you do about the talent war? You have to get creative. Hybrid work, listening and getting feedback, right? Recognition, L&D, trust, and building it and building high levels of it, right? And there's other things you can do. I'll have an exercise where all of people in a group go through the 3 most life-defining moments and share that with the group. And it's amazing what'll happen. And there's another exercise called sliding door moments. And there's a lot that you can do. They don't take that much time, and they make a huge impact, because people will build super close relationships and people will all buy into it, right? Some people are slower to do it, but everyone does it, especially when it's in a group. And then it comes down to teamwork, right? Teamwork makes a dream work. That's sort of trite, but it's true. And if you got questions, here you go. There's, my free game, Cards Against Mundanity. I have a paid version of it. This one you can download. And I have tons of other materials and things. And if you want them, need them, or have a question area, reach out to me. Happy to do that. If you want to sit down and pick my brain, it's not a sales thing. I'm happy to help you, because I'm here at CultureCon because I believe in it, love Zach and the organization. I want to be helpful. So I thank you all for going here. I know I speak fast and go through this quickly. So I'm happy to answer questions now, later, or whenever. I want you to make sure to use this information, because otherwise, if you don't, then it turns into Netflix, right? Something you just watch. I don't want to let that happen. So thank you all, and I'll take questions and, you know, anything that you all have, just ask and we'll talk about it.